The Basilica of Sant'Apollinare Nuovo was built by the Gothic king Theodoric during his brief but intense stay in the city. Probably given the proximity to the royal palace, which was located a few dozen meters away and was razed to the ground by the Longobards and Charlemagne, that room served as the Palatine Chapel. It is not difficult to imagine what and how big was the splendor of the decorations of all kinds in the church. So much that when the Emperor Justinian granted to Bishop Agnellus the freedom to reuse the basilica for the Orthodox Christian worship after the fall of Theodoric, it was renamed St. Martin in Golden Heaven. St. Martin of Tours was one of the strongest opponents of the Arian heresy, which the Theodorician court was devoted to. The rest of the name says it all about the splendor of the church. Later, the basilica was renamed Sant'Apollinare Nuovo when the remains of the saint were transferred from Classe to Ravenna, kindly a fierce dispute between the respective monks about the truthfulness of this shift. The diatribe was suppressed by Pope Alexander III, under whom it was ratified that the mortal remains of the saint were still in Classe. Going from outside to inside, you can immediately see the arcade, built during the 16th century, which probably replaced an earlier structure. Also, the mullion window that is in the facade belongs to the Renaissance period. Next to the church is a nice round bell tower, built in the 10th or perhaps the 11th century, about 39 meters high, with different series of windows which increase in number as you proceed upwards. This expedient permitted to lighten the structure, similarly to what happens in the coeval bell tower of the Abbey of Pomposa. Internally, the church has 3 naves separated by 2 rows of 12 columns, as many as the number of the tribes of Israel or of the apostles. This building, like many others in the territory, was a victim of the subsidence, the more creeping enemy of Ravenna. It made the whole church sink under the road surface. Between 1514 and 1520, a strong consolidation was necessary, and it brought the columns to today's floor level, necessarily lowering the airiness of the round-headed arcs that divide a nave from each other. A further consolidation occurred in 1955. At first glance, the decoration of the apse is very different from the rest. The mosaic present therein was destroyed by an earthquake in the 8th century, while the coffered ceiling of 1611, commissioned by Cardinal Caetani, has replaced an earlier decoration. It is ironic to note that the 17th century tondos present between a bow and the other suffered the most from the passage of time compared to the ancient mosaics that adorn the church. Reading of the decorations is easier if you proceed from top to bottom. Beginning in the higher end closer to the coffered ceiling on the left side, you can see panels with scenes from the New Testament spaced with decorative shells, symbol of rebirth, above which are 2 doves. All the mosaics date certainly at the time of Theodoric the Great, and show a relatively young Christ, without a beard and with curly hair, with a jeweled crossed halo over his head. The lively pictures portray scenes of miracles, like the paralytic in Bethesda with the bed on his back, or the healing of a possessed man with evil spirits, represented by pigs escaping by swimming. All figures are presented frontally, with the exception of the last picture, where intervened the unfortunate work of the Roman restorer Felice Kibel, who not only created a profile figure but also altered the original design concept. Instead of the transformation of water into wine, he illustrated the miracle of the loaves. To the same height, but on the right side of the nave, there are other stories of the life of Christ, all focused on the Passion and always spaced out by the same decorative elements. In these scenes, Jesus has a different appearance compared to images seen before. He has a thick beard, long hair, and a more melancholic and sad expression. This change in appearance is probably an inheritance of the Roman classical tradition. Men of Rome, usually hairless, had a beard and hair grown as a sign of mourning and grief. You should never forget that Theodoric, who became the king of Italy for all purposes, hoped to reconstruct the ancient Roman Empire as it was before the transfer of the imperial insignia to Constantinople from his predecessors and enemy Odoacer. Descending from the above-described fasces, on both sides of the nave there are strictly male figures separated by arched windows. They are all smartly dressed in white and in a front position, but we aren't able to say much about them. We don't know if they represent the apostles, the saints, or the fathers of the church, since there are no inscriptions or abbreviations whatsoever besides the figures. Moving the gaze downwards, you meet the impressive processions of men and women on both sides of the nave. The sequence of the men on the right starts from the image of the imperial palace near the entrance of the church. The building looks empty, but a closer look can reveal pieces of hands and other limbs in the white mosaic columns, especially on the left side. In all likelihood, under the porch, instead of curtains, there were the figures of King Theodoric and his imperial court with open arms. Following the fall of the Gothic king, Bishop Agnellus was commissioned by Emperor Justinian to purify the church from all images that could somehow remind the previous domination, running what is called the damnatio memoriae, a curse of remembering. In all likelihood, even the previous mosaic decorations were removed, and in their place it was inserted the typically Byzantine processions that are in sharp contrast with the Gothic aesthetic you can notice in the above-described pictures near the ceiling. The men, who are all holding a wreath in their hands, are dressed in white on a golden background. All of them have the same expression and the same cadence, as to eliminate the temporal and spatial dimensions. Following the procession, you pass from the city left behind you, and also drawn on the wall, to reach the figure of Saint Martin, dressed in purple surrounding a wreath. Saint Martin is the last saint depicted before the figure of Christ, sitting on a throne with a hieratic attitude. Jesus is holding in his hand a scepter, which is an invention by Felice Kibel, since before there was an open book with the words Ego sum rex gloriae. Next to him, figures of 4 angels. On the left side of the church, the decorative logic is the same as on the right. Instead of the palace, you can see the port of Ravenna, complete with battlement walls. After that, there is a parade of 22 virgins, very elegant and covered in gold from head to foot. Also in this case, the procession is solemn and rather static. A curious note in this context is the small little lamb at St. Agnes's foot. In Latin, indeed, agnus means lamb. The procession ends with the figures of the 3 kings, much more dynamic than those of the virgins, as if they had just jumped down from their mounts. The garments of the 3 wise men are colorful and made in the East, and they are offering their gifts to Mary, who, unlike women in the procession, is sitting in a blessing attitude, just like Christ in front of her. Even in this case, the Madonna is surrounded by 4 angels holding a long stick that served to silence the assemblies. The decoration of the apse was completely rebuilt after the Second World War in the place of the Baroque one created in 1612 that was in a remarkable contrast with the magnificent austerity of the church. Enclosed among 4 beautiful columns, there is an altar of the 6th century. To the left of the visitor, there is a Plutus showing a vase with vines and 2 peacocks. Noteworthy are, in the end, the fretwork grilles and the marble ambo in the right nave, characterized by a typical Eastern taste.